Today, we're going to get to talk through a fun little case for a little gal. Her mom, Brooke, is here with me, and we're just going to kind of walk you through what the experience of addressing eczema, alopecia. We dealt with mold at certain points. We had a little bout of impetigo, even, and just kind of a run-of-the-mill skin case with a side of hair issues. And that was really kind of the presenting piece that started us. So, Brooke, I kind of just want you to tell me like where you had been, how you came to being open to this line of like dealing with your daughter's health concerns and really where she was when we started.
Yeah, for sure. So she was diagnosed with alopecia in 2022, when she was 2 years old. And we had noticed it's like, one day she had all of her hair, the next day she had like a quarter size perfect circle of no hair.
Mm.
And she was always our bald baby. She didn't have a lot of hair whenever she was born, and her first 2 years of life, it just took her a while to kind of, get her hair growth, which seems normal. And then when that first kind of bald circle popped up, we're like, okay, like, this isn't normal, right? For you to lose, have a bald spot on a 2-year-old's hair. So we did go to the pediatrician who referred us to the dermatologist, and then we got the alopecia diagnosis.
Mm.
So that was really our care at the time. We received, your typical topical steroid creams to put on the spots on her hair that did not have hair. And that was really our treatment. We saw the dermatologist. They wanted to see us every 6 months just to like check the progress of it. I eventually stopped going to those appointments because there wasn't anything new. They weren't
Mm.
giving us, anything new to treat it with. Um, Her first spot the hair did eventually fill in, and then, until a new spot popped up. So, and that's just kind of the cycle. A spot would appear, it would eventually grow back hair. Um, and then I believe it was around January of 2023. I noticed after giving her a bath one day that she really just didn't have, like, her hairline was super receded
Mm.
on both sides of her face. She didn't have like the typical like sideburn area hair. It was all kind of pushed back, just making her forehead look really, really large.
Mm.
Um, and, that was definitely concerning to me. So we did end up going back to the dermatologist. There still was, nothing new, just continue with the creams. This is how alopecia is.
Mm.
She might lose all of her hair, she might not. And at the time, that's all we knew. So we just continued with the creams. Um, in March of 2023, I started my own, I guess, adventure, we'll call it,
Mm.
working with a nutritional therapy practitioner for my own health concerns and just
Mhm.
wanting to make myself feel better and, getting my body to where I felt like it should and could be. And I saw a lot of success in the process I went through. And then I found you, Elizabeth. I was listening to a podcast, and you were
Mm.
a guest
Mm.
on the podcast. And I don't remember the specifics of what the topic was, but at the time, I didn't really realize that going the nutritional therapy route was an option for a child as young as 3 years
Mm.
old. So that was really
Mm.
never like a consideration for me
Mm.
until I heard that podcast. And so, yeah, reached out to you and, just given my own successes, and I had been in it for a couple of months, and I was really starting to like learn and truly understand that, what you put into your body, how you treat your body, you can start to heal things
Mhm.
without medication, without, the traditional means of treatment that your doctor's, a typical provider is going to give you. And so I was really just convinced that we didn't have to live with an alopecia diagnosis for Paisley, and that there may actually be something, going on in her little body to cause the hair loss.
Hmm.
And I was, yeah, pretty interested to get started and see what we could uncover to try to heal her, and not have to deal with questionable ongoing hair loss for potentially the rest of her life.
Yeah, I love that you in your mothering like have approached this whole thing with curiosity. I think a lot of times we as moms like don't take the liberty to be curious and to maybe involve ourselves or question because one, motherhood is overwhelming. Two, small children are overwhelming. And if you're working and like all of those things can just feel like a lot. And a lot of times it's easier to take the advice of professionals, which we should be able to trust and like get really comprehensive help from. But the truth of the matter is, all professionals are people, and me included can miss things and not know things. And I just appreciate that kind of when you came in, you were like, I'm just kind of convinced that alopecia isn't something she has to live with. Like questioning one of those, like, she's very small. It's not typical that you have major hair loss or lack of hair growth when you're a small person. Let's just try to figure this out. Like, there has to be an answer. And I think that's one of those through lines that I see parents kind of coming to conclusions with that like whatever this odd thing in that my child has that we could explain it away or think of reasons that it could be there or try to rationalize it like the moral of the story is it's not typical for children. And we see more and more of that these days, but the difference, I think, is when a mom or a parent is willing to be curious. And when we started with Paisley, we worked through the GI healing package. We added a mycotox, I think, shortly. No, we started with a mycotox, I think,
Yeah.
because we had talked through how there was water damage. You guys live in an older home, an old farmhouse. And so we just kind of talked through, okay, what are things that can contribute? I want to rule that out. Um, and when her testing came back, I think it started to explain a lot of the symptoms because some of the things that were going on too, where there was a lot of picky eating. I remember going through maybe pre-care or the very beginning of care and you kind of feeling like overwhelmed, like, how am I going to do diet change? Because this kid is like pretty rigid about what she eats. So what was that part of her life like at that point?
Yeah, so I mean, she was just, as you said, super picky. We at that time, ate the typical, processed kids food. She could
Mhm.
live off of the, little Debbie muffin packages.
Yeah.
That was her favorite thing. And um, she was just, very picky. She ate tacos.
Mhm.
Um, we did a lot of like store-bought chicken nuggets. We did like frozen waffles.
Mhm.
And then, she would eat pretty much everything. She did go to daycare at the time. And so, the typical Kraft mac and cheese, chicken nuggets, frozen pizza,
Yeah.
all the what I feel like is a typical diet for a 2-year-old.
Mhm.
But I, on the other hand, am like, I personally have always tried to eat healthy. So, the fresh, not processed, foods, chicken breast or, here's a hamburger, she would not try those things. She luckily had always had a couple of, she'll eat any fruit for the most part, and she had
Mhm.
her, kind of go-to vegetables.
Mhm.
So from a fruit and vegetable perspective, I feel like she was okay.
Mhm.
It was just really the meat, the protein that we
Mhm.
had trouble kind of experimenting with new things.
Yeah.
So, and one of the other things that really was eye-opening to me when we went through our intake process, we had to, track her, not only her food intake for a week or two, but also her bowel movements.
Mhm.
And, since she had, was at daycare most of the day, Monday through Friday, I always was just assuming that she was, having her bowel movements somewhere else
Yeah.
because she really wasn't, not very often would she have a bowel movement at home.
Mhm.
And in tracking that, we realized I think she might have had a bowel movement 1 or 2 times that whole week that we
Mhm.
tracked. I
Hmm.
had no idea that she was constipated like that. And so it was really eye-opening just like going through that intake process and realizing, oh, there's clearly some digestive, work that we need to go through.
Yeah.
And that was another thing that we worked with you on to heal and get her back to, daily bowel movements. So that was just an unexpected um, win for us.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too that until you sit down and track it, it's not something that we notice because once kids are independently potty trained, or even if they're not and they're in care during the day, you're not picking up your kid asking like how many bowel movements they had today, or if they did, like it just becomes not an issue until it's an issue. And it can go along chronically like that, and it can add to that picky appetite, which we'll kind of expand on that later, or that preference for brown foods. I always say like pizza, mac and cheese, chicken nuggets, chips, those kind of things, and call them my brown food kids, which she definitely wasn't that entirely. But when you have that backup inside, that can lead to a lot of like, I don't feel awful. I'm not miserably constipated, but there's a lot of trash inside of me that's kind of shifting how I feel. But that also is another
Mhm.
clue for me that, like, hey, there's probably some fungal, bacterial issues going on. So when we got back the mycotoxin test, definitely wasn't wildly shocking. Ochratoxin was very elevated, which kind of suggests some aspergillus overgrowth in her environment, which aspergillus mold is very prevalent in the air. Like it's around. A lot of mold, we get into this mold conversation. Well, every house has mold, a lot of people say to me. And like, maybe that's possible because there is mold in the air. But what should not happen is mold growth. There should not be material in a building where mold can come make a home. We should be able to breathe in mold in the air like normal and interact with it, but when it's able to make a home on some water and some building structure, then we have an issue. But she had elevations of citrinin, mycophenolic acid as well. So there's definitely like a sizable mold situation. And then looking at her GI map, so mycotoxins urine, super easy to collect for a kiddo for the most part. And then when we look at the stool test, which again, really easy, not invasive, there was a lot going on. She had a lot of bacterial overgrowth, even of good guys. She had way too much of everything, basically. Several families of different unhelpful bacteria, which really, when that body's constipated, some of that stuff can kind of build up and they can feed off of the stool that's hanging out. And then she had a big candida overgrowth. So that was kind of our clue to say, like, okay, now we have to start looking for maybe some mold involvement. And the mold is an immune trigger. So it's going to basically lay the foundation for the body's bacterial, fungal, like normal balance to get out of whack. So what was it like moving into the mold remediation and finding process? Because that is so overwhelming for so many families. Like, what did it look like for you guys?
Yeah, it definitely was. It was a lot to take on. So we knew, as you had said, we knew that we had water damage in the kitchen just from previous leaks. And so we essentially just, it was, and we didn't really have that many options. We knew we had to either fix the kitchen, right?
Hmm.
Which would include just how our kitchen was designed. Like it include basically taking it down to the studs and rebuilding it back up. So that was an option. We could move or we could do nothing. Well, doing
Hmm.
nothing was not an issue, and moving also, wasn't an option either.
Yeah.
So yeah, we just started a big project of renovating our kitchen and tearing down the ceiling, the walls, where all the water had just kind of been festering for a while.
Mhm.
And we essentially just rebuilt. So we did, that was a few month process. So it definitely was overwhelming. On being on the other side of things now, I'm glad that you know, it's an investment, obviously, and it wasn't something we were necessarily prepared for. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's nothing more important than the health and safety of not only our kids, but like me and my husband as
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
we want to make sure that we are in as clean and healthy as a of an environment as possible. So we're all, we can be as healthy as possible. So we got through it. The kitchen, we got rid of all the moldy stuff. We did have a mold remediation company come in and take down all of the, moldy materials. So they essentially started the demo, and just continued until they didn't find any more. And then we took it over from there,
Okay.
and had everything put back together. But yeah, it was a lengthy process. But again, it was a necessary step to make sure that we, have a healthy and safe environment for our family.
Yeah, and thinking back, I know we paused care once you really got deep into the remediation, but even before we got there, because we started working together in April of 2023, and I think we went all the way until that fall. I think we kind of like stopped in November maybe and paused till I think early the next spring. Um,
Mhm.
I'm curious about two things. Did you feel that you had support needed here to at least kind of direct you in some ways with the mold? If so, or if not, obviously either way, sharing about that because mold is such a thing where like information is so conflicting and you can read 1,000 things online and it can feel like you have to move out and burn your house down. And then it can feel like you could probably live there and be okay if you just remove visual things. And then
Yeah.
also, did you continue to see progress with Paisley before everything was really fully taken care of? Or did it feel more like you had to get the mold before we saw movement? What was that part like?
Yeah, so I feel like you gave great insights and resources as far as like, contacting an IEP, an
Mm,
indoor environmental professional who can,
mhm,
do testing, come and take a look. And I had originally called a couple of like IEPs in our area,
mhm,
and I got conflicting information from them too. I feel
mhm.
like a couple of the people I talked to, were some essentially said, every house is going to have mold in it because we did buy those little like petri dish
Yeah.
tests and just to do ourselves and like sit out in our room.
Mhm,
And to me, those results looked gross, right? Like
mhm,
that
mhm,
there was growth, there was obvious, on the petri dishes that we set out pretty much everywhere.
mhm,
And so I was trying to explain that, over the phone to these individuals, and some of the feedback was, well, like those tests aren't super reliable, which, okay, maybe they're not. I realize the tests that they do when they
mhm,
come in with their special equipment is, probably is much more detailed and specific. But
mhm,
so that was kind of, frustrating a little bit that the people I'm reaching out to for help um, just, didn't really seem to tell me what I wanted to hear, I guess.
mhm,
Um, but I feel like, you obviously, I feel like are, you have a lot of knowledge about
mhm,
mold and what
yeah,
it can do to a body. And
mhm,
so I have always trusted, the information that you have provided us.
mhm.
And it's nothing, I've learned a lot about mold
Sure.
and
Yeah.
just, constantly like breathing it, is it's a toxin and it's a
Mhm,
stressor for the body, which makes sense. But until you actually sit down and think about it, it's not really a thought that you have.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm,
so, and you gave great like suggestions for like one of the easiest things we did was just incorporate like the air purifiers in all of the
mhm.
bedrooms that
Yeah.
you suggested,
Mhm.
just for, a quick fix, really.
Mitigation. Yeah.
So that was one thing that we put into play.
Do you feel like you
Yeah.
saw progress with Paisley before all of the mold was gone, or did it feel like that piece had to be done before we really saw any movement for her?
Yeah, I don't really feel like I noticed any hair growth until kind of like we picked back up
Mhm.
after the remodel was over.
Yeah.
Digestion wise, like everything we kind of treated in that first phase in the fall, like
Mhm.
absolutely, like I feel like immediately, her
Mhm.
digestion and bowel movements, once we, kind of got into a rhythm with supplements and detox and things like that. I feel um like her gut health we
Mhm.
saw just waves of improvement
Mhm.
right off the bat. But I do feel like it took us kind of into the second stage
Mhm.
before I noticed any of her hair growth.
Yeah. How did it feel to kind of implement? Because she was a little bit rigid in her food choices, and also like you were taking her to daycare where food I think was provided, and that kind of had to that changed things for you guys. How, looking back now, like how did the effort part of it feel? Did it feel like something that was manageable or really difficult? And was there any mood change or, working with a small person who's very opinionated, did you see that shift or how was it to work against that? A lot of times healing suggestions, recommendations we make can feel like a lot from my end even. I'm saying we need to do all these things. But how did it feel on your end in that early phase working with Paisley to get some change where she was not big on change. She liked her tacos.
Yeah, she did, and she still does.
Yeah.
I remember feeling extremely overwhelmed because you're looking at the tests that we did in all of her like green, yellow, and red foods that
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
need to not eat for the 30, 60-day period. And
Hmm.
I'm like, all of her favorites seem to be on this list that we cannot eat right now. So it was really overwhelming at first.
Hmm.
Um, but we focused more on the foods that she liked that she could eat
Hmm.
versus what she couldn't eat. And yes, with the daycare, so I started just packing all of her food.
Hmm.
So breakfast, lunch, snacks.
Hmm.
We purchased your cookbook, and
Hmm.
to this day, she still loves those muffins.
Oh, I love
Uh,
that.
and we found a lot of good resources in your cookbook.
Yeah.
And then you provided us as well some like recipe links to recipes. So I started
Mm.
making, homemade chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
So they're just with the resources that you provided, and then once I kind of learned the types of foods that she could eat that wouldn't fall in like the red and yellow categories, I
Yeah.
found some other recipes myself. So it took a little while, but she, I honestly, I've always been so proud of how she adapted.
Yeah.
She was always a trooper. I honestly think, having the healthy, food choices as she now that she's in kindergarten and she sees her friends, eating other things. I think it's going to be more challenging now that she's getting older than it was, a year
Yeah.
ago. But overall, I feel like the transition was really good. Um, and once we kind of got into the routine and she got used to it,
Hmm.
um, she did fine.
Yeah.
It's really tough to break her of those mini muffins that she could eat,
Yeah.
1 to 2 packs a day of. But again, we leaned on your muffins
She
and
has a new muffin. Yeah, that like replacement stuff with kids is wildly powerful. Like I always joke, if your kid likes a carrot in one shape, try to cut him a butternut squash in the other shape. And people make faces at me on calls, which I would too. I would be like, whatever, lady. But it
yeah.
literally works. Like they're not that complex beings. Sometimes they really just need, they're similar. But for the listener too, we did do a food sensitivity test, which there's lots of debates and discussion around, and I don't use it as a holy grail. I use it as a healing tool to remove inflammation. So we're never doing that test and looking for foods that the person would have to remove forever. We're looking for foods that are really pushing the inflammation at the time, and we want to bring that inflammation down so the body can use inflammation rightly to heal, as opposed to using it to be confused against certain foods. And when an immune system is confused, a big part of what it does is it attacks certain foods. So, like, a lot of her favorites were on there. Bell peppers, I think, were one of the things that she was super into. Um, Butternut squash, not that that was necessarily a favorite, but broccoli, beets, asparagus, apricots, honey, kale, grapes, very common kid food, green beans, dates, which maybe she wasn't pounding dates, but dates are in so many paleo and like healthily sweetened kid foods. But removing those really helped us. And I don't always do it, but if we've got major skin stuff or if we have lots of immune threat going on, I really want to like help calm that body really quickly. And so sometimes it's worth the work. Or if a kid's really at a critical place with allergies, I'll bring that in to just help take a burden off the immune system. But we kind of did that. We worked through test results. We worked on some gut stuff. You guys worked on mold, and we reconvened in the spring. And at that point, I kind of brought to you like, hey, we've got the mold out now. I think at that point, where were we on hair regrowth? Like once we were picking up after remediation, nothing had started yet, right? Maybe little bitty bits, or was it?
Yeah, and I think it actually had maybe gotten slightly worse. So she still had the like the receded hairline on the sides of her face, but
Mm-hmm,
she also was um her hairline like at the back of her neck
mm-hmm,
was receding and kind of like creeping up towards, closer and closer to her ears. So it
mm-hmm.
was essentially along like the entire, outer circle of her scalp, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. In my notes, I kind of see we had some hit and miss eczema. That was a lot better, and it would kind of when it would come, it would a little bit more clear on its own. But I kind of brought to you at that point the idea that the chronic strep that we had seen on her GI map, but then we also kind of just going through her history, she was a kiddo had had tubes in her ears. She'd only had solo ear infections. She hadn't necessarily had like a big typical strep presentation where her throat hurt and she had strep all the time. She had more of the ear issues and they had since fallen out. She'd done some antibiotic use and we kind of worked backwards too, that she'd had some rash responses, maybe a little bit of allergic response to some of that antibiotic use, and that also the first amoxicillin really didn't help at all in the ear. So we kind of walked through some of that history and connected some dots and worked at the alopecia and kind of clearing some of the gut things by addressing her immune system. One of the big things that I've discovered as we work with more chronic clients is in kiddos, that immune system is really developing quite a bit under the age of 6 or 7. And so if it grows up in an environment of like mold, a constant immune threat, it's going to be a little confused. If it grows up with a regular immune burden of something like strep that we never really get all the way away, it can show up in lots of ways. Some kids have a lot of picky eating with strep. They can have um, separation anxiety. They can have regressions. They can also have strep can infect lots of parts of our body. It can get in our hair follicles. So one of the things we need to work on was how the immune system was regulating strep for Paisley. And so we worked at strep and candida through the immune therapy lens. And I think that's when we really started to see some more change around that second time we worked together. So kind of just covering like, was that process difficult? I know you still had food kind of locked in a really good place. We were just adding a new therapy, but how was it to work through that and what kind of change did you see and maybe timeline stuff too?
Yeah, so I feel like the transition with the immune therapy, I mean, went probably as good as it can be.
Mhm.
I feel like I pretty quickly I remember reaching out to you and saying, hey, like, I'm seeing new little fuzzy hair on the sides of her face.
Mhm.
So I just have nothing but good things to say about the immune therapy. I think that was definitely, a perfect plan of action, and we're still seeing, I think I don't know, it's September, so we're maybe 4 months in, not 3 or 4 months in.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, we're seeing great hair growth along the sides of her face.
Mhm.
The nape of like the back of her neck in that area where their hair was lost is slower to grow, but I am seeing some new hair.
Mhm.
So overall, I mean, I feel like it's definitely doing its job, and I didn't really see any notable like side effects.
Mhm.
Um, her personality changes,
Mhm.
her no emotional outbursts or anything like that.
Mhm.
So I feel
Mhm.
like overall, just it's been great for her and for her hair growth.
Yeah, what about the eczema? Are we still holding where there's little to no eczema issues and
Okay, I'm glad that just triggered a thought. So one of the things that we did see when she started the immune therapy was kind of like some pimply spots on her bottom.
Mhm.
And I know you had mentioned that that was like a normal response, like that's the
Typical, yeah,
normal
strep
response.
rash? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So We do still have a little bit of occasional,
Hmm.
like just irritated skin on her, just mostly her bottom, really nowhere
Hmm.
else.
Okay.
But yeah, that's really the only skin issues that we've been seeing lately.
I think in the beginning too, you had said to me like there was maybe a little spot behind her ear on the neck, maybe that it wasn't a
Oh,
huge deal, but for me, that is an area where we can see skin stuff that's related to strep, where there's rash, eczema, skin oddities over some of those
mhm,
really lymph concentrated areas around the ear, nose, throat area where like strep loves to hang and hang out. So that I think was something else in the beginning. But by and large, for sure, she seems to have just kind of like, which is my favorite part, honestly, of addressing the immune system of a child versus working through traditional eradication protocols where we try to kill things and drain. And it's profoundly different when an immune system hasn't learned what it needs to do, which is that's the whole reason we toss our kids in the dirt and want them outside and we want them exposed to all sorts of things because it challenges the immune system to develop, which we still want to do that. But sometimes when a body has existed with either these chronic immune threats, which I think in her case was just, the low level of mold exposure just kind of weakened her body as it would anybody's. Um, and she's not able to kind of develop tolerance against strep that was appropriate or against the fungal stuff that was appropriate. Then you end up with symptom load. But as soon as you start straightening out that immune system, they just kind of like rise up. Like they stop. I think you mentioned too a little bit ago she had a stomach bug and you were chatting and you're like, but also she's not been sick at all since we worked together. So, like that piece I think is always telling too that the body is able to stop being confused. Removing the mold was a big step, but then rerouting that immune system to address what it needs to instead of being confused and not doing what it needs to do, really, really made a big difference for her.
mhm,
One of the last things I kind of want to cover is, one of the things I always ask is chronic illness, which I think Paisley, I would maybe call it chronic issues, chronic irritations.
yeah.
There were little inconveniences for sure, but she wasn't, alopecia is not cool and we do not like it. And as females, I really don't like it. I would really love for Paisley to have a full head of hair, but it wasn't,
Mhm.
like super crippling necessarily. Maybe
Right.
some of that food pickiness and things like that was, but walking through the season of chronic healing, what's one way that someone has supported you or your family, or just helped like the process of working through this journey for Paisley be easier?
Um, gosh, there's, I guess, a few different people I can recognize. So she was in preschool whenever we started our care with you. And so we just had a lot of help in ensuring that she is consuming good things for her body.
Mm-hmm.
So, her daycare provider was on board with me, packing her food and making sure she wasn't getting, the heavily processed things that the other kids were getting.
Yeah.
Her teachers, all last year in preschool, were so helpful in making sure that she was, eating the right things and what we wanted her to eat. They let me, pack snacks. If there was ever any special treat, they would, text me right away saying, hey, the rest of the class is having this. Can she have it? They, when they were on their Sam's run or on the weekends, stocking up on snacks for the class, they would text me like, hey, here are some things. Can
Oh,
they take any of these? So they were just so great to work with. And I know that it really helped Paisley feel like included because you can feel like the oddball when you are the only person who chooses to eat healthy,
yeah.
especially in today's society. So
Mhm.
I was really appreciative of that. And then, my family as well. My stepdad lived with us for over 3 months. He
Mm.
essentially was our contractor renovating our kitchen. So
Oh.
he did so much for us. My parents helped out financially with
Mhm.
education. As I mentioned, it wasn't something that we necessarily expected and had planned for, but we needed to make it work. So,
Yeah.
our family was key. And then just those outside sources kind of helping Paisley, daycare and school, those are top of mind for me kind of as we've been going through this process.
Yeah, I love to hear about the school thing too, because that's a place where sometimes we have to step in and help navigate or even validate, which drives me crazy because we should not
Yeah.
need me to have a phone call with the school to say, hey, this is legitimate and this is what this child needs to thrive for a season. But I love when you're not met with tension there because our kids are smart too. Like they know when an environment they're in isn't supportive, and they also know when they can wiggle through something they don't want to do because there's not support, but also just to make that easy and inclusive. And I also think it's just a place where a lot of us haven't been exposed. I know when my boys went to school and I introduced the idea of a classroom snack bag, their teachers were like, okay, so we just use this when there's like a party and I was like, yeah, anytime there's like a fun food, I don't want my boys to be left out of fun foods, but these are fun foods they can always have and they can grab it from there and that'd be easy, no big deal thing for you. And that has created ripples in communities that we've been in where other kids can do the same thing. And sometimes I think it's just those simple ideas that we just need help inventing because other people don't who haven't experienced either chronic health issues or healing processes. You don't know. You don't know what you don't know. I think is very,
Mhm.
very pertinent here. But I love that you guys kind of had that support. And I didn't know about your stepdad moving in. And I think too with mold remediation, I've heard so many fun stories of family members and friends helping along the way or taking kids for a weekend so mom and dad could help with demo stuff and keep kids out of that environment. There's mold remediation should be done well and it should be done correctly, but also it is expensive and there are parts that sometimes you can have people help with and you can kind of I wouldn't say piecemeal it, right? Because it's always got to be done right. But
Right.
to be able to kind of bridge the gap where you guys, had help with demo and like the more dangerous part, but then the rebuilding piece, you had support with. So I think that's so great and just an encouragement for folks who are facing mold because it does feel like a big giant trap and you can't get away from it. But there are creative ways to think through it. And sometimes it just involves talking with someone who's done it before to give you ideas or having help of folks in your community. But I really appreciate you sharing. I think Paisley's story is not necessarily unique, but is a bit different because the alopecia was a piece of how her body was manifesting the infection load and the mold was kind of like enabling all that stuff to kind of show up, but maybe not a typical way that we would think like, hey, there's more help out there for me than steroids in the usual derm process. And I think I enjoyed so much reading through like your end of care survey about how just the education piece pay dividends for the rest of the family. And there's so like that's my goal. When we create content, you all have video access to a lot of teaching and we ask you to go through it. A lot of people do or don't, and I point to specific videos that are more helpful. And I think those things are really designed. My goal is that we empower you to take better care of your family overall. If you've been in care for one kid, I want you to leave feeling more empowered to tackle anything else that comes your way. And it's just always nice to hear that because we do spend a lot of time trying to trying to simplify all of this content and all of this nutrition information that's out there that the internet has only blown up more. But I love Paisley's story. I love that we were able to kind of like pause and meet you guys where you need to be to through the remediation and that her hair's growing and I can't wait to see more. And kind of
Uh,
see how that shifts for her over time since she is so small and I would say, would you agree a full head of hair isn't something she's quite had yet in her lifetime?
yeah, that's an accurate statement.
Yeah, but hopefully we're on our way there. So I appreciate it, Brooke. And for our listeners too, if this is something you're dealing with, any parts of this, constipation, picky eating, the alopecia piece, allergies, eczema, all of those things are things that we work at from a different perspective without employing primarily steroids and really do support families to get successful results and also not lose your marbles in the meantime, teaching your little kids how to eat differently. So reach out, grab a clarity call if that's something that would be of interest to you.